Most people have flushed a fish at some point, or at least watched someone do it. And almost everyone who did it thought they were being kind. Here's the thing, they weren't. And the ripple effects of that 1-second decision are genuinely disturbing once you understand what's actually happening on the other side of the bowl. So let's talk about what flushing a sick or dying fish actually does. To the fish, to your tank, and to the water systems that the rest of us share. Because there's a lot going on here that nobody tells you, and one of the things I'm going to get to toward the end of this video is the part that even experienced fish keepers usually don't know. Stick around for that, because it changes how you think about your whole tank, not just the sick fish. I've gone deep into the research on fish welfare and aquatic disease, and what I found was genuinely surprising. Here's how we're going to move through this. First, what the flush actually does to the fish itself. Then, what a sick fish is carrying that you probably don't want going anywhere near shared water. And finally, the actual right way to handle this, which is a lot simpler than you might think. Let's start with the fish. When you flush a live fish, you're not sending it somewhere peaceful. It's far from a humane or ecological act. The fish will likely die a slow and unpleasant death, and the journey through the pipes is almost certainly fatal. The moment that flush hits, the fish goes from a stable, temperature-controlled, chemically balanced environment into cold, low-oxygen sewage mixed with chlorine, detergents, and ammonia. The flush itself is incredibly traumatic. The swirling water, the pressure changes, and the potential impact against porcelain can injure or kill the fish almost immediately. And here's something that makes this worse. Fish are cold-blooded, which means their brains keep functioning at low temperatures far longer than you'd expect. Veterinary and welfare research shows that a fish can recover from deep anesthesia even after gill movement has stopped, meaning a fish that looks dead to you may not actually be dead when you flush it. It's still experiencing its environment. It's still responding to chemical burns and oxygen deprivation. It's just unable to show you. Fish have nociceptors, the same basic pain-sensing structures found in other vertebrates, and strong, hardwired escape responses to exactly the kind of stimuli a sewer pipe delivers. You're not ending suffering. You're redirecting it somewhere you can't see. So that's reason one. Now here's where it gets bigger than just one fish. A sick fish isn't just a fish, it's a biological package. And what's inside that package is more loaded than most hobbyists realize. Even dead fish can carry diseases and parasites that can infect native populations. And live fish can survive the flush and establish themselves in local waterways, disrupting the native ecosystem. But let's get more specific than that, because the vague "it spreads disease" warning doesn't really land until you know what disease we're talking about. Research on ornamental fish has found Mycobacterium species, a family of bacteria that causes chronic, hard-to-treat infections, in roughly half of sampled freshwater aquarium fish. One of those species, Mycobacterium marinum, is the organism behind what's known as fish tank granuloma, a real human infection that aquarium hobbyists can contract through skin contact with tank water. Studies have found it not just in fish tissue, but in aquarium water and biofilm samples too, meaning many tanks that look totally healthy are quietly seeded with it. And the thing about mycobacteria is they cling to surfaces. They live in biofilms. Serious outbreaks in aquaculture often require destroying all affected fish and completely disinfecting every piece of tank infrastructure, because these organisms don't just rinse away. So, when you flush an infected fish, you're not solving the problem. You're relocating it into sewer infrastructure where it can colonize new surfaces and, during overflow events, potentially reach natural waterways. Now, I said earlier, there was something even experienced fish keepers usually don't know. We're getting close to it. But first, the invasive species side of this, because this is where the numbers get almost unbelievable. Most people assume that the toilet-to-ocean pipeline from a certain animated movie is fiction. And they're right, that most flushed fish don't make it to the ocean. A 14-inch goldfish was found downstream from a wastewater treatment plant in the Niagara River, which gives you a sense of just how hardy some of these species are. But the bigger and more documented problem isn't fish surviving sewage systems. It's people releasing aquarium fish directly into ponds, lakes, and stormwater systems, thinking they're doing the fish a favor. Goldfish are described by researchers as an ecological nightmare. They disturb sediment and vegetation, release nutrients that trigger algal blooms, transmit exotic diseases and parasites, and reproduce at higher rates than most freshwater fish. In Alberta, officials documented a single released goldfish population, exploding to an estimated 40,000 individuals in one pond. One pet. 40,000 offspring within a few years under favorable conditions. Alberta's invasive species specialist noted that people are actually intentionally dumping them into our waterways, and they are overwintering and thriving and finding ways to reproduce. The response from municipalities has been extreme. Dewatering ponds, running multi-year electrofishing campaigns, or applying rotenone, which is essentially a fish poison, just to undo what started as someone's idea of a kind release. Releasing invasive species into waterways in Alberta carries fines of up to $70,900 and up to a year in prison. And it's not just Canada. The species now runs rampant in places like London's Epping Forest, Nevada's Lake Tahoe Basin, and Australia's Vasa River, all of it traced back to discarded pets. The goldfish you bought for $3 at a pet store doesn't stay $3 worth of harmless. In open water with no natural predators, it becomes a sediment-churning, algae-promoting, pump-clogging ecological problem that costs governments millions to fix. And even government campaigns now specifically tell residents not to flush even dead fish, because viruses, bacteria, and parasites acquired in aquariums can be carried into stormwater systems during overflow events and from there into rivers and lakes. Okay, here's the thing I promised you, the part that even experienced keepers miss. Most people who flush a sick fish think the problem is the fish, but the fish is just the visible tip of a much larger infection network. Mycobacteria and other pathogens don't just live in the fish. They live in the snails, in the substrate, in the biofilm on your filter media, on the walls of your tank. The sick fish you're looking at is a symptom, not the source, which means flushing it doesn't clean your tank. It doesn't protect your other fish. It just removes one visible sign of a problem that's still very much present in your system. If you've had a fish get sick and die, the right response is to look at the whole tank: water quality, stocking density, filtration. Not just remove the evidence and move on. Chronic stress from overcrowding, poor water quality, and handling depletes fish immune function and suppresses antibody production, creating exactly the conditions where pathogens multiply. The sick fish was likely a warning sign. The flush just silenced the alarm. So what do you actually do with a fish that's suffering and can't recover? The answer is a clove oil overdose, and it's genuinely simple. An overdose of an anesthetic agent dissolved in water is the most humane method available for euthanizing sick aquarium fish, and clove oil, which contains eugenol, is readily available from most chemists. Approximately 0.4 milliliters of clove oil per liter of aquarium water is sufficient to cause death. You place some of the fish's own tank water in a clean bucket, then add the clove oil. But here's the critical part: mixed with a little warm water first. The clove oil must not be added all at once, as this can cause the fish to become excited and distressed. It needs to be added slowly. Clove oil acts as a central nervous system depressant. Absorbed through the gills, it leads quickly to loss of consciousness, and at higher concentrations, it disrupts vital functions, leading to a painless and irreversible cessation of breathing and heart activity. The fish must remain in the solution for at least 30 minutes after all gill movement is stopped. Once confirmed, placing the fish in the freezer until fully frozen ensures it is dead, and it can then be disposed of safely. Wrapped in a paper towel and placed in the trash or buried in the garden away from water sources. That's it. That's the whole thing. The World Aquatic Veterinary Association recommends clove oil as an acceptable method for euthanizing fish, citing its efficacy and minimal environmental impact. It's not complicated. It's not expensive. And it's the difference between a peaceful death in familiar water and a panicked suffocation in a sewage pipe. If you've lost a fish before and didn't know any of this, that's okay. Most people don't. The flushing reflex is so normalized that almost nobody questions it. But now you know what's actually happening, and that changes things. The big picture here is this. A sick fish is not just a personal problem. It's connected to your whole tank's health, to the pathogens living in your filter and substrate, and potentially to waterways far beyond your home if it's handled carelessly. The flush feels like a solution because it removes the fish from your sight. But it doesn't remove the problem. It just moves it somewhere else. Take care of your fish the way you'd want to be taken care of. It takes 5 minutes and a bottle of clove oil, and it means something. If you want to go deeper on fish health, what early signs of disease actually look like, how to tell a stressed fish from a dying one, and what your water parameters are really telling you, there's a video coming up next that covers exactly that. Watch it. Your tank will thank you. And if this one opened your eyes, drop a comment. I genuinely want to know if you've ever flushed a fish thinking you were doing the right thing. You're definitely not alone, and the conversation helps other people find this too.